Welcome to Rotary. It's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you for joining us today via Zoom. To get us started are our greeters, Sherry Smith and Dan Maycock.
Just want to say a happy Thursday to all of you and hope it's a good week.
Yep, same. Hope you all enjoying the great weather and at least getting outdoors and hopefully celebrating the beginning of spring.
Very good, and welcome to our guests. We've got a few guests zooming on today, so thank you all for being here. Next up is our music with Doug Rich. Doug.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Rotary. After last week's job by David Rogers and 31 of his closest friends that were not exhibiting social distancing tendencies, I figured I'd go a little bit outside the box today. Music technically is poetry, and poetry can come in many forms. But at this time of year, as our buds start to pop out of our fruit trees and our lawns and fields awaken from their dormant winter solstice, the works of the famous poet and writer Terrence Mann always come to mind for me. He speaks of the passage of time, history, and how we all connect regardless of age around one common theme. And so, fellow Rotarians, I give you Springtime as seen through the eyes of the famous poet, Mr. Terrence Mann. Carolyn?
Ray, people will come, Ray. They'll come to Iowa for reasons they can't even fathom. They'll turn up your driveway, not knowing for sure why they're doing it. They'll arrive at your door as innocent as children, longing for the past. Of course, we won't mind if you look around, you'll say. It's only $20 per person. They'll pass over the money without even thinking about it. For it is money they have, and peace they like.
Ray, just sign the papers.
And they'll walk out to the bleachers. Sit in shirt sleeves on a perfect afternoon. They'll find we have reserved seats somewhere along one of the baselines, where they sat when they were children and cheered their heroes. And they'll watch the game. It'll be as if they'd dipped themselves in magic waters. The memories will be so thick, they'll have to brush them away from their faces.
Ray, when the bank opens in the morning, they'll foreclose.
People will come, Ray.
You're broke, Ray. You sell now or you lose everything.
The one constant through all the years, Ray, has been baseball. America has rolled by like an army of steamrollers. It's been erased like a blackboard, rebuilt and erased again. But baseball has marked the time. This field, this game, is a part of our past, Ray. It reminds us of all that once was good, and it could be again. Oh, people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come.
Play ball.
Thank you, Past President Doug. That's wonderful. Now we've got our invocation with Patty Powers. Patty.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful that we can be together on this beautiful spring day. I want to focus for just a moment on communication. We all know that being present, being fully present in the moment is fundamental to authentic communication. And authentic communication is at the heart of our relationship with others. And ultimately, it's at the heart of peace as well. Please reflect with me or join with me in prayer. Always present God, help me to be present to all who need me. Help me to be present to those I know too well to actually see, and those who are unseen strangers to me. Give me the ability to model your attentive, loving gaze when I view my world, my family, and my friends who are seen and loved by you first. Finally, may my availability be marked by a desire to be like you, open to being sent, open to being loved, open to becoming love to the world. Amen.
Thank you, Patty, very much. Now we've got a couple of different announcements to make. First of all, you have probably received an email in your inbox telling you about the District 5060 Club Spring Training Experience that's coming up on Saturday, May 1st. Great opportunity for some leadership training within Rotary. If you're interested in signing up, please contact President-elect John Ball. And also, our Racial Justice Committee meeting next week on Tuesday, the 13th of April at 3 p.m. They're going to have a couple of guest speakers you might be interested in seeing. Dory Peralta and Paul Tabayon are going to be discussing racial generational bias, addressing anti-Asian racial bias today. And if you're interested in that, please let Carolyn know and she'll send you the Zoom link. Now we've got our Sergeant at Arms with Mike Johnson. Mike. Mike, we're not hearing you, so make sure you're not muted.
Okay, so you should be seeing a screen that says YUGM Fruit and Fruit Workers. Is that correct? Awesome. Okay, so I've chosen this theme because of the theme of our speaker today, and so at the UGM Medical Care Center is a free clinic that serves the poor, uninsured, and underinsured. Over 3,200 patients together donate roughly $100,000 a year to help operate that clinic. What percentage of clinic patients work in agriculture and related industries? So among those 3,200 patients, how many of them are working in the fruit industry? Generally speaking, not just fruit, but agriculture overall. Whoa, why did we go backwards there? Sorry about that. If you're guessing 54%, you are correct. So that means a majority of the patients that we see at the clinic are working in our fruit industry. They're workers in our factories and they're out in the orchards. And so the UGM Medical Care Center is an important part of delivering healthcare to the workers that we're going to be talking about today. So part of why we picked that. Next question is also on this topic. Dr. Jim Abendhaus passed recently. He was one of the central figures in helping UGM Medical Care Center become what it is today, the largest free clinic in Washington State. Dr. Abendhaus was 86 years old. I'm wondering if folks in Rotary know how old the mission is. Is it 76 years old? Is it 85 years old? Is it 81 years old? Is it 88 years old? Well, if your guess was 85 years old, you are correct. If you didn't, then you owe people money. Then you should send it to Carol, and because she needs your money because you didn't guess right. On this continued subject of UGM's care for the workforce that we'll be talking about today, the UGM Dental Clinic also serves the poor and uninsured. This year, Dr. Mike Bueller retires. When did he begin volunteering his dentistry at YUGM? Was it in 1454 BC, the year Moses led the Exodus from Egypt? Was it in 1788 when our Constitution was ratified? Was it 1978, the year of peace accords between Egypt and Israel, or in 1066, when the Battle of Hastings secured the Norman conquest of England? If you guessed 1454 BC, you are correct. No, okay, all right. He's been doing it a long time, but not quite that long. It's 1978. Dr. Bueller's been volunteering his dentistry at YUGM, taking care of folks since 1978. That's amazing, you know. So Dr. Abendhaus, Dr. Bueller, this mission and its care for the workforce of our fruit industry and our agriculture industry has been a really key thing in this valley for a long time, you know, and it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful to come into that kind of legacy, you know. Okay, so last one here is is just about the mission in general. So despite being an incorporated entity, for many years, the mission still did not seek IRS recognition as a tax-exempt organization until the decade known for sock hops and the Big Bopper. When was tax-exempt status gained for the mission? Was it 1959, the year the Big Bopper, Richie Valens and Buddy Holly died tragically in a plane crash? Was it 1951 when the first regularly scheduled flights between New York City and London began to be operated, by the way, by El Al? Who knew that, right? Like these El Al Airlines operated the first regularly scheduled flights transatlantic flights between New York City and London. Amazing. Was it 55 when the polio vaccine was declared safe and effective for public use? Very relevant to healthcare and Rotary. Or 1957, the year the S&P 500 index was introduced. You owe Carolyn lots of money, if like lots and lots and lots of money, if you didn't say it was 1957, the year the S&P 500 was introduced. That was the year the mission actually got its tax exempt status, even though we've been around since 1936. Hey, thanks for letting me serve the club in this way. I hope that was fun and interesting and did something to help set up the speaker as well.
Excellent, Mike. Thank you so very much. Now for our speaker introduction, Jordan Madsen. Jordan.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, John DEVANEY. While I've known him for 10 years, I realized I really know very few of his personal details. Over the years, it seems every time I begin to stray into conversations away from the work at hand to learn those personal details, he steers me back to the task at hand. I do know that he and his wife, Karen, have 2 boys, and hopefully soon they will be empty nesters. I've also learned that John is about the only other male that I know of that pays less attention to sports than myself. His affinity for politics and the resulting trivia is the envy of John. I'm sorry, I don't know who else would actually care about that stuff. Hold on. John's texting me to get back to the task at hand here. So the Washington State apples, pears, and cherries represent a farm gate value over $2.8 billion. A study 9 years ago calculated the economic impact to be $7.5 billion. 61,000 jobs depend just on the apples. The industry is made up of 2,200 growing entities. Keeping that many businesses marching to the same beat is impossible, but we have tried. Over the 120 years, we as an industry have created trade organizations to help facilitate this. Then in 2014, 4 of the largest industry organizations merged to become the Washington State Tree Fruit Association. The WTF, as I like to refer to them, was tasked with 3 primary objectives: data collection, industry education, and the, how do I put this, creating a unified, consistent voice for state and local government relations. John DEVANEY, who has been the director of who was the director of YBGSA, was selected as its president and has served since its foundation in that capacity. I don't really want to give him props, so I won't, but I will recount a message my dad asked me to pass along to John just last week. He said, I quote, "You tell John he and his staff are doing a great job. We are very fortunate to have him." So let's hear from John DEVANEY and hear about vaccinations in the tree fruit industry.
Thanks, Jordan. If you didn't already have sympathy for your speaker today, just imagine what my annual performance reviews are like with Jordan as my chairman. Let me share my screen for you here. Great, there we go. So as Jordan was saying, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we protect our food system and our workforce, not just during COVID-19, but in general. I think many of us have gotten a little tired of hearing all about COVID-19 over the last year, but there are some lessons to be learned. And I think that we are not going to be, this is not the last crisis we're going to be seeing. Agriculture and our food system were particularly vulnerable in this crisis. Not only do we depend on long supply chains and on being able to deliver products that move physically. You can't transfer food over the internet. That's why we haven't had our Rotary lunches at our meetings for quite a while now. But they also depend on people. You need that large workforce that Jordan talked about, 60,000 folks just to harvest our apple crop and move it to market. And people are what were both the vector and the victims of this pandemic. So we not only had unique vulnerabilities, but particular challenges because food is not something that you could defer. A lot of other economic activity can be put off until after the pandemic was over, but food is essential. You're not going to delay your lunch or dinner for a year or more before you are wanting to see that arrive. And so the ability to ensure that our food system remains up and operating during whatever crisis occurs has long been recognized as essential. I was sometimes asked, how did agriculture get determined to be essential at the start of the pandemic? And I had to remind folks, we'd already been written in as essential in every federal, state, and local emergency management plan going back decades. It was just assumed, and correctly, that we would need to eat. And so that was recognized as soon as the initial emergency orders went out. The first indication that we had of the problem was actually around the supply chain, even before there were known cases here in the Northwest. We export a third of our fruit crops overseas, and our members started seeing a slowdown in shipments to Asia as the pandemic spread through China and East Asia before we even saw effects domestically here. So we knew that that was likely going to have similar kinds of effects on the domestic market. Then, when we saw the lockdown, we saw huge disruptions to domestic supply chains, not just those empty shelves, but we had perishable foods that were not in a condition to readily move to market. And that's not something that the average consumer necessarily thinks about. But there are strict requirements on how products on your store shelf must be labeled and packaged. And you can't transfer food products that were packaged in a generic box to go to the back of a restaurant, for example, or a cafeteria, go into a consumer-sized package on the shelf. I mean, Bob Gerst may order his beer by the keg. Most of us don't. So we had to shift a lot of our agricultural and food production to be ready to go for the retail market. Tree fruit was in a lot better position than a lot of other commodities just because our apples are already pre-packaged by nature to be ready for the consumer and are taken out of the box generally to be sold in the stores. That doesn't mean, though, that the supply chain disruptions that we saw in agriculture are over. We're still seeing significant supply chain disruptions. Containers and consumer product movement is still upended. The fact that people have been stuck at home means they've had a lot of time to order things made in China on Amazon. And the demand for containers heading from East Asia to North America has spiked significantly. And that means that it's been harder actually to get capacity going back the other direction. You think that that would be easy, but the profit margins on moving product from Asia to North America are so high that shipping companies don't want to wait to reload with anything that is not of the extremely high value like consumer electronics. So they will leave partially filled or even empty from West Coast ports to rush back to Asia to refill with those products that you all are buying on Amazon. And that's caused further disruptions and ongoing disruptions to our export markets. But again, the pandemic is mostly about its effects on people, and those have been ongoing. Agriculture was early on identified as an area of concern, both because we were essential and our workforce was out in public doing their work when many of the rest of us in our communities were able to telecommute from home. But we also saw racial disparities in the impact of the pandemic. This is the most recent data from our state's Department of Health website. And as you can see, the number of cases in the Hispanic or Latino community is more than twice its percentage of our state's population. So there was definitely cause for concern around the effects of the pandemic on the Latino community. Now, where there were issues is that a lot of folks who aren't familiar with agriculture in our community in the Yakima Valley tend to conflate Latino and farm worker as being synonymous terms. Certainly, the vast majority of farm workers are Latino, but not all Latinos are farm workers. So if you saw high population rate, high infection rates in the Latino population, their first assumption was it must be something that's happening on farms. Well, you know, that's a little bit racist, but it's also a problem of if you're looking in the wrong place for the problem, you might not be bringing about an effective solution. I would just point out that according to the data throughout the pandemic in Yakima County, about 15% of COVID-19 cases were associated with food and agricultural workers, which is pretty much the same percentage of our county's population that works in food and agriculture. So you weren't really seeing a higher incidence in that population spreading out to the broader community. What we were seeing is the community infection rates applying to the agricultural workforce as well. Basically, we were not causing it, but nor were we immune from it. We also had issues, of course, with if you're showing up for work, you're subject to the mandatory temperature tests and screening. So you tend to find what you're actively looking for. So we found a lot of previously undiagnosed cases when people did show up for work that if they were just at home, you might not never have known about. The net result, of course, was that farming in 2020 and still looks very different than it did before the pandemic. There are ongoing rules around how we will deal specifically with practices and safety practices on farms for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. That doesn't mean to say that there were not safety rules before some of these specific rules were implemented. Any employer in our state has an obligation under our state labor and industries regulations to address known hazards, and COVID-19 was a known hazard. So like every other employee, agricultural employers had to take steps to protect their workers and implement those the best recommendations as they evolved from our federal and state officials. But we did get some very specific requirements just around agriculture, largely because of the very specific concerns around disparate impacts in the Latino population and the agricultural workforce as well. Those are still in place and have not really changed since they were first implemented in the early stages of the pandemic. So while many of you have celebrated moving on to subsequent phases, in agriculture, we're still dealing with the strictest form of the rules that were implemented back at the beginning and height of the pandemic. So our association, our industry's response was, first, you have to know what the rules are and how to help our members follow them. As Jordan said, we have thousands of growers in our state, dozens of packers. They all needed to know what those rules were. And many of us are used to more traditional state rulemaking processes. Anyone who works with Olympia knows that Washington State loves process. And we're very used to having proposed rules with public comment periods, translated documents so that everyone can participate, online meetings, in-person meetings, revised rules with more comment before something is finalized, and then education sessions before a rule takes effect. That's not how it works in a crisis. We had emergency rules and gubernatorial orders that took effect that day or the day after they were promulgated. So we had to quickly absorb what the requirements were and then take steps to comply with them and make sure that everyone understands them, because systemic solutions mean that you have to be having not only full participation by everyone, but full participation by everyone all of the time. It also had to work with a number of governmental organizations from the local, state level to craft and comply with those rules, some of whom we did not have established relationships with. We've all learned more about local health districts, but that was not a layer of government that was on most agricultural producers' radar. If you thought about local health districts, it was probably because they'd inspected your restaurant to make sure they were following health practices. Otherwise, those were not really people that we knew very well. We got to know them quite well. We worked closely, even directly with the governor and his staff on some of these rules. And with questions about the rules themselves, we even had to go to court to help ensure that the state was actually defended from challenges to its rules, to make sure that our views were reflected and that the state rules that we were following were upheld and not further modified. It was a complex, confusing situation. And it was unprecedented, really, but we did what was necessary to keep that food system moving. I would say one of the bigger challenges that we had, as many people have had throughout the pandemic, is managing expectations about what is possible and what employers are able to do. We had to manage a lot of worker perceptions around what is safe. Is it safe to be asked to come to work during the pandemic? Is an employer doing what is necessary to keep them safe? The biggest confrontations actually, or conflicts, were actually over money, not surprisingly, where some workers heard that there was hazard pay in high touch industries dealing directly with the public, nursing and healthcare and so on. And they said, well, if I'm essential, shouldn't I get extra bonus pay too? And we had to remind them in many cases that we weren't getting any extra funds in order to produce and sell food. Because of the disruptions to export markets, we actually in many cases saw lower prices returning to packers and growers. So the money was not there. And we were in a different circumstance where you could close down a facility to the public and be implementing those on-site safety precautions. So we had to remind everyone that one, money is not the same thing as being safe. And we had to deal with expectations around what kind of information you could share. There was a lot of anxiety around the pandemic and everyone felt entitled to know everything. But in some cases, other employees' healthcare information was not something you could share. If you knew you had an employee who had been exposed to COVID-19 or tested positive, you had to trace those contacts and inform the employee that they had been exposed and might need to be tested. But they might say, I want to know who it was. I want to know what their healthcare status is. That's not something you could disclose. And of course, we had the issue of what is physically possible. A lot of our packers and growers wanted to provide masks in the early stages of the pandemic, but every employer around the world wanted to acquire and provide masks to themselves and their employees. So just because you wanted something doesn't mean you could get it, rather like our situation at Costco with toilet paper, right? I had producers who were saying they had placed large orders for masks and would be told they'd be there in 2 weeks, which then became a month, which then became 6 weeks, which became 8 or 12 weeks in some cases. Those orders kept getting delayed and postponed indefinitely. And there was a lot of frustration by those employers and workers because they just knew that the PPE that they felt they should have was not there. And then, of course, there's the expectation around what you could do within a workplace only environment. You only spend a third of your day there. So what was happening and how consistent were all employees being in taking the precautions necessary to keep the disease from spreading when they came to work? All it takes is one employee going to visit their mother on for a family Mother's Day party and coming back to work the next day, and you could have a problem at your workplace. So it was difficult to manage those because, like anyone else, agricultural employees are individuals who make their own decisions and are not subject to employer control all of the time. Our association did try to give our members the tools that they were going to need in order to manage around this crisis. We work closely with the Yakima Health District and Yakima County Development Association to help them understand the rules, including going out on site to packers and farms to assess what they were doing, make sure they were meeting all requirements and following all the best practices. So they knew they were doing everything that they could to protect the workforce before there was a L&I inspection or violation. People didn't want to wait to find out that they weren't doing it right until there was a problem. We've also worked closely with the state government who acquired additional PPE for workers through their own emergency procurement processes. So this is a picture of our loading dock at our Hanson building where the Fruit Commission and the Tree Fruit Association are. We moved almost 500,000 KN95 masks through there over the last few months, another 120,000 cloth masks, and we worked with Farm Bureau and others to help distribute additional hand sanitizer supplies. You have not smelled something until you smelled entire pallets full of hand sanitizer. It's tough stuff to move around. But we managed to get that out where it needs to go to employees and workers in the field. We also developed a lot of training posters, videos, and webinars that we made available free to our members so that they could train workers in English and Spanish on what they could be doing consistently to prevent the spread of the disease. We're all ready to be done with COVID-19. I think that's an understatement. And we know what the way forward is. It's not just about managing the pandemic, it's about getting past it. And the way forward is really getting as many people in our community and our workforce as possible to get vaccinated. This is a picture actually from Jordan's facility where one of his employees is being vaccinated at an on-site clinic that he did last week. A lot of our packers are sponsoring on-site clinics so that their workers don't have to take time off work, make special arrangements in order to be vaccinated. In many cases, employers are offering incentives as well. It's a very touchy subject to say you're going to require vaccination as a condition of employment. So very few people, none that I'm aware of, are doing that, though it is legal according to the federal government if you follow all the EEOC requirements. But instead of dealing with making it a requirement, most are looking for incentives to encourage it, whether that's offering additional bonus time off or cash bonuses to be vaccinated at one of these clinics, or just making it as easy as possible. There's a lot of effort going forth in the agricultural and tree fruit community to get the workforce vaccinated as quickly as possible. As I said, it's employees' hesitancy rather than resistance that's really slowing things down. We've all been confused by the changing timelines, metrics, and requirements. I could tell you I've had some frank and open discussions with the governor's office and others around the communication saying the priority phases are still in effect, but they're not going to enforce them. That is not good messaging. Saying there are rules, but we're not going to enforce them, and so don't bother following them, is something that good rule following responsible people may cause them to hesitate and wait to get vaccinated, even as FEMA's clinic there at the Sundome has doses available that are going unused. We really want to get as many people as possible to understand the process and address any myths that might be out there around the safety of the vaccine, whether one is better than another, some of those questions. So we have bilingual videos that are available on our YouTube channel that anyone in the community can use. If they have friends, colleagues, workers that are hesitant around vaccination, go ahead and use that and talk to them about why they should do it for their own good and for the community. It's also going to be an ongoing challenge. Agriculture has a seasonal and migratory workforce, whether those are people who migrate on their own or are coming in on temporary foreign visas sponsored by an employer. They will be arriving throughout this agricultural season. The state is working with producers to test arriving workers, whether they're arriving internationally or domestically from another state, to see if they have COVID-19. So far this year, there have been over 7,000 tests of arriving ag workers and only 16 positives. I can tell you, if you've been on those calls with Department of Health, they've been shocked and delighted at how low the infection rate among the agricultural worker population arriving in our state has been. But we want to make sure that that stays low and that people do not contract it once they're here. Though, as I said, those rules and requirements remain in effect, but as we get workers vaccinated, there are questions around, when will those rules be updated to reflect the changing risk profile and other measures now that we can be taking, such as vaccination, to manage that risk. This is a chart of how the agricultural workforce changes. Those gray bars are the statewide totals. So you can see that there's a big swing between the quieter season of the year and peak cherry season through apple and pear harvest, when we're going to see tens of thousands more workers arriving in the state to do agricultural work who need to be tested, monitored, and vaccinated. Those colored bars, those colored lines, are the county totals, and you can see those charts vary. Red is the Yakima County trend line. There's a big swing in our county as well. And each of these counties is a slightly different peak time where more workers are going to be arriving. So we can't just call this a one and done kind of situation where we finish vaccination and then move on. We're going to have a task ahead of us throughout this year. And we're going to continue to have changes in the agriculture and food system as a result of this. They say that it only takes about 6 to 8 weeks to form a new habit. Well, it's been over a year that we all have been changing our consumer habits as a result of COVID-19. Before the pandemic, our retailers, customers who buy fruit from our warehouses, were saying they wanted to get rid of plastic bags. As all of you have switched to curbside pickup or self-checkout, where you want an easily scannable bag, they've instead said, we want everything in bags, or most of their product in bags. That's changed the orientation of packing facilities and what they're packing into. It's changed the demand for plastic bags. And of course, we put our fruit generally in boxes, and there has been a high demand for cardboard thanks to our friends at Amazon, and that has greatly increased the price of cardboard for all food and other producers. Anyone who puts product in a box knows how much more expensive cardboard is now. So even as we haven't seen an increase in the price of food at the wholesale level, at least, we are seeing a great increase in costs. So it remains a very challenging retail and production environment to adapt to. And again, this is not the last disruption we're going to see to our food and agricultural system, or probably to our economy. We are learning a lot about how quickly we change our production practices, what it means to be essential, and how we can try to be flexible and both be protective and adjust our operations. So whether the next disruption is purely logistical, like disruptions in trade routes, whether it's another public health issue, or whether we have a political and conflict-driven disruption in the world in the future, I think that agriculture and our food system and its importance to our daily lives is more apparent to all of us than ever. We're less likely to take our food system and the people that work in it for granted than we were before COVID-19. So if there's been anything positive to come out of this entire year of painful disruption, that appreciation and the ability to plan for the future is probably what's been the bright spot in this situation. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that any of you may have. I'm sure Jordan has prepared some devilish ones for me.
I didn't think you'd give me the opportunity, John.
I'm looking at the chat, but I don't see any so far. Thank you, John. Any questions or comments? Oh, I see one from, let's see. There are a number of H2A workers in Yakima County who are here year-round. What is the average number of H2A workers in Yakima County year-round versus during the peak season? H2A workers are not really allowed to be here year-round. It is a seasonal program, so the maximum period of time when an H2A worker can be in the state or in the U.S. is 10 months. There are seasonal workers doing different activities in agriculture at various times through the year, but any individual worker is not here for more than 10 months. And that number varies significantly because one of the requirements is that you have to recruit domestically before you can be approved to bring in an H2A worker. Statewide, the total in agriculture for H2A is about 26,000 jobs. Some of that is double counting workers because some of them come in for one H2A job and then transition to a second one. So you can usually multiply that total by about 0.75. It's usually about a quarter less than the total number of jobs approved. It's actually easier to track H2A workers and secure their public health than it is other seasonal ag workers because they're on a known visa, going to a known employer, staying in state inspected and licensed housing, so you know where they are at work and at home. And so you can protect their health. The bigger risk, and one of the issues that was brought up with the state, is if you're driving workers out of state licensed housing, you're going to be hiring people who are moving on their own and staying on a cousin's couch or in other less than ideal circumstances where their public health risk during the pandemic might have been significantly higher. So managing H2A is visible because it's countable and trackable because of the state nexus. But the agricultural seasonal population that moves on their own and is involved in highly mobile temporary work for a variety of employers is actually where there may be the greatest risk. Not seeing some kind comments, but I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you all very much.
If I can ask questions, this is Charlie Robin.
Hi, Charlie.
It does seem there's a perception that the reason why Yakima got the COVID numbers that it has is always regularly blamed upon the agricultural workers. It seems that, especially since you're providing numbers that say that you've had, as low a number as you've had in this calendar year, and yet our numbers continue to spike. How are you responding, or what type of work are you doing to get the word out? It's not us. It's not us. I mean, what are you doing to counter the perception that's out there?
Yeah, I think, Charlie, I don't want to say that we had nothing to do with it, because what the issue I think is that it was not something happening in the workplace, the agricultural workplace necessarily, that was a problem. When we had the lockdown and people were asked to stay home, they had a clean break with their past routines. It became more normal to not go out. But if you were an essential worker, whether that's in agriculture, healthcare, or anything else where you were sticking to your daily routine, you got up, you had your coffee, you got in the car, and you went to work. It didn't seem like that big a stretch then to also do other things that were part of your previous routine, like stopping at the store, visiting mom, visiting your friends, right? So I think that Yakima County and other communities that had a high percentage of essential workers had a community-wide problem because our routines weren't as disrupted as they might have been in Manhattan or Seattle or area communities that had a higher percentage of their workforce who could telecommute. And so there, I think, is where we saw the change really come when we had the community-wide mask up campaign. That's when we started to see our numbers change, because the agricultural workplace requirements have been in place since May, but it was when our community as a whole started to look at these issues that we got traction on reducing our case counts.
Were we seeing those same kind of effects and numbers elsewhere in the state that also had high agricultural populations? Or
they did, and it tended to follow patterns of when they had activity going on at work. You know, when they had more people out and about working, then they started to see their cases tick upwards. It also might have varied depending on what kind of agriculture they have. You know, we have very labor-intensive fruit and vegetable agriculture in Wenatchee and Yakima and the Columbia Basin. If you're in the Palouse, not so much. One guy on a combine can pretty much handle it. I see there is a request, let's see, an update on state and federal legislation affecting agricultural labor. There's a lot of agricultural labor legislation. I'm guessing that that's primarily around immigration reform and ag worker reform. There was legislation passed through the House, co-sponsored by Zoe Lofgren from California, the Democratic chair of the Immigration Subcommittee in the House, and Dan Newhouse, our own congressman, on a bipartisan basis to reform the agricultural labor visa rules to provide a pathway to legalize the current undocumented agricultural workforce, and then provide some additional enforcement mechanisms once those two corrective measures had been put in place. That has had the support of agriculture. When it passed in 2019, it was the first time that Congress had acted on agricultural labor law since, immigration law since the mid 80s. So they had sort of neglected that issue for a very long time. We were all excited. We're getting traction. Things are happening. And then COVID-19 took effect and Congress went into a virtual environment. All of that momentum was lost. I am happy to report that now that they're back to a more normal meeting schedule in DC, that those two members, Mr. Newhouse and Ms. Lofgren, reintroduced their bill. It was passed by the House again, and now it's being considered in the Senate, where we're hopeful that there will be some action taken to improve the agricultural visa programs. I'm happy to take questions as long as you all want, but I think that I'm not seeing any more in the chat, and I think we're approaching that time. Carolyn is smiling at me, so I'm thinking that is correct.
Well, John, I'd like to thank you very much for being our program today, proving once again that some of our best programs are our own members. And in honor of you speaking today, we are going to be making a donation in your name to Yakima Rotary Charities. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As we start to wrap up our meeting, we now have our Rotarians Are Going Places with Rick McDermott. Rick.
Hey everyone, I had a wonderful visit yesterday with our very own Carolyn and Lorna at the new offices for Rotary on Nob Hill in the new YBCC West Campus. And I know a lot of us haven't had a chance to, there they are, aren't they awesome? So they just do such wonderful work for all of us and for the Rotary Club. And so the cool thing about this office is it's so high tech. I mean, we took Lorna and I took a little tour yesterday, a little mini tour, so to speak. Weren't able to get into the live simulated birthing room at the Allied Health Center, but maybe that's for another day. So when things open up again, it's going to be wonderful to even have a Rotary meeting at the facility, and also have committee meetings as well as a outdoor atrium where we can have events, maybe a cocktail hour or two. So we want to really give another warm round of applause to our own Carolyn and Lorna, who have moved to the new office. And the nice thing is in the winter, they don't have to wear rice packs to keep warm anymore. So the heating and AC works wonderfully. And so again, if you haven't had a chance to check out the new digs, feel free to pop in and take a look-see. And that's all we have for this week.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick, very much. And it is a beautiful office. So we're really excited to have that opportunity to get out there and indeed do some wine tasting, etc. So thank you very much for sharing some pictures of it. So we've got some wonderful programs coming up in the future. Next week on the 15th, we're going to be joined by Yakima Police Chief Matt Murray, who's going to talk about community policing. The following week, which is the 22nd of April, Eric Pettigrew is going to join us from the Seattle Kraken National Hockey League. We'll look forward to that. And then on the 29th of April, Ron Gangler is going to speak about the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. So make sure that you've got Thursday circled brightly on your calendar. We look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.